welcome to my channel. My name is Emma and I was diagnosed with autism about 5 years ago now, and I also have ADHD. Fun! And so there's a few things that I want to do on this channel, but one of them that I want to talk about today is going over some experiences from my life, looking at those experiences now with the new lens that I have, knowing that I'm autistic, which hopefully will be useful for you too, and thinking about what we could have done differently, but really also hopefully helping some people understand us a little bit better, but maybe even helping us understand ourselves a little bit better too. Fingers crossed. Today, I want to cover how I mutinied on a cruise ship to get my preferred solution, the autism traits demonstrated in that story, how my manager might have managed the situation differently, how my actions and traits impacted others, and would I change my action if I knew then what I know now? When I was about 25, I went to work on cruise ships. I was working in the shops on cruise ships, which is kind of a cushy place to work, although you do have to work very long hours when the ship is at sea. When the ship docks, very often you can get off the ship and you can go and enjoy your time in wherever you are due to the duty-free laws. I was on a ship in the Caribbean. Very nice. This was my second cruise ship. You have 6-month contracts on your cruise ship. This was my second 6-month contract. So I already had experience of working in the shop, of understanding what was required, what was normal, everyday kind of functioning in the shop. And one of the things that is very necessary to your job is whenever you come into the home port, the place where the boat is essentially based, then you have to pick up what's called stores. And stores are all of the stock that's going to be used this time in the shop. Every time you come into home port, the whole team has to get together to get the stores onto the boat, to get everything unpacked and as much as possible put away. Depending on the ship that you're on, there might be some storage you can just put it into, but most of the time when I was working on ships, we had to put it out on the shop floor that day so that it was ready for when we set sail. So it's kind of a big job to have to do. But the other thing is, when you're in that home port, it might be your only opportunity to go to a shop, a regular shop, like Walmart, for example. There's a lot of stuff you don't need when you're working on cruise ships. They're making your food for you. There's like a bunch of stuff you just don't need. But you do need like shampoo. And in my case, I really needed Famous Amos cookies, among other things. But that was kind of top tier priority stuff. We don't get Famous Amos cookies in the UK. This is a heavy loss, having moved home. So at this point in time, I was moving onto a new ship. My roommate, who is still my best friend today and is a delightful, wonderful person, was a very, very good friend, and we had a lot of giggles and it was great. Everything seemed fine, apart from the first day we have stores. The manager announces that we'll go and have lunch now before we've emptied everything and got everything ready. And I was like, what? That's a little weird. Why are you going to have lunch now? Like, can't we just get off the boat and have lunch later and do this now? It was at this point that I discovered that this manager had a different system to my previous manager. So my previous manager had worked us all really hard to get the stuff unpacked, put away. So we had a couple of hours that we could go into Florida and get whatever we wanted or hang out, just go for a nice lunch. This manager had no intention of letting us off the boat, like ever, in Florida. And instead, we would have lunch and then spend the day unpacking this stuff and then go to work in the evening, which I mean is okay if you're doing it sometimes. But the key problem was that meant no Walmart ever, because there wasn't really any Walmarts on the cruises that we were doing on that ship. And I guess to an extent, I got used to having that stuff. I got used to having that day off in the real world where I could get my stuff. So the first few times this happens, I just kind of go along with it. We have lunch, we do the unpacking, everything's fine. But the whole time in the back of my head, it's like, I'm not loving this. I'm not loving this. And then I start asking some questions casually, like, why are we having lunch now? Why aren't we getting off? And the gist was, it's impossible. It's impossible to do all of the unpacking and get off and have time to do anything. And I was like, that's not my experience. I've done this before. I've done this on ships before. I don't think it's impossible. I think this is absolutely possible. This is silly. I ran into a brick wall, basically. And as some of you will know, for autistic people, brick walls, they're not very bricky in our imagination. We climb over them. Then began a mutiny, essentially. I didn't intend to cause any great disaster, but I had several conversations with the manager and with other people, and I just couldn't get around it. I couldn't get anyone to try seeing if we could get off on time, and I couldn't get the manager to change her mind. She was immovable on this thing. She wanted to go have her lunch, and that was it. And I just couldn't see how lunch, and I mean, it's shit lunch, right? So you're having it every day. Why that was better than getting off and potentially going for a nice lunch or something else. You know how when someone in a position of authority tells you to do something and they don't explain why, how that can become problematic for us? Yeah, it happened. I didn't shout and cry, and I didn't have any kind of tantrums or anything like that. I just refused to go for lunch repeatedly. And it started pretty simple. It was just me, and she would say, let's go for lunch now. And I said, no, thanks. It's okay. I'm going to stay and unpack. And she was like, you'll be starving, lady. You won't have enough food. And I was like, I've got stuff in my room. It's fine. I'm just going to unpack now. And I just stayed and unpacked. And for the first few weeks, that was it. And then my roommate joined me. Very soon after I started my action, she joined me. So there was the two of us then. And it has to be said that my roommate is adorable and funny and wonderful. And most people like her. I don't think this would have been successful if it wasn't for the fact that she joined me pretty soon afterwards. And she didn't even really have to say anything very much. It was just the simple act of being there that made it easier for other people to think, this could work. And for the first few weeks, it was a pointless waste of time. For the first few weeks, the manager definitely won. It took us forever. It was, two people working on it. It was an epic failure. But I couldn't give up. I was going to do it, whatever. I was sure that this was a possibility. And even if we didn't get off every single time, I felt like I wanted to prove my point. Slowly, other colleagues joined us. One week it was 3 of us. The next week it was 4 of us. The next week it was 5 of us. And this thing that had been taking so long for just me and my friend together started taking less and less and less time. We started to get really, really fast. So much so that really within a very short time, we had enough time to get off the boat. Even though not everybody had joined us. The manager and her 2 friends were still going for lunch, and there were a couple of other people that were still going for lunch too. But the majority was with me unpacking everything, and we were really fast. So we started getting off, and I won. Don't ask me what happened after that. My memory is extremely holy. I think she left. I think it was the end of her contract, which is lucky. And we had a new manager that came in and everything was fine. I think that's what happened. I don't think I drove her away. I think she actually completed her contract and everything was fine. And the timing just worked out that way. Pretty sure. My memory is terrible. So that's the story, basically. I mutinied against my manager on a cruise ship and won. I felt pretty good about it at the time. I thought it was pretty cool that I had done that. I thought that was pretty cool that it had worked out. And I was right. I was so right. And for like a really long time, I was like, this is my best story. Mutiny on the Bounty. Yeah, this is the best story. 5 years after diagnosis, and a lot has happened, right? It does. When you get diagnosed, a lot happens. Do a lot of research, do a lot of soul searching. And I want to look at this story again. Because it's still a cool story, I hope, right? It's cool, right? It's cool. Let me know in the comments, right? It's a fun story, right? I hope. But I want to look at this again now with an autistic perspective. Not just an autistic perspective, but how did autism contribute to this situation? Did it? Didn't it? Was there anything in there that was autistic? Was this just some person with too much confidence? Not a very confident person. How was my autism relevant in this situation? So the first obvious trait from autism is black and white thinking. It's all over this story. Black and white thinking. So black and white thinking is the trait where there's no gray area for us. Something is either right or wrong. It's either good or bad. It's really hard for us to see the gray area. Now, that's not to say that we can't understand complex issues. We absolutely can understand complex issues. But very often, morally, something is either good or bad for us. And the complexity that other people feel are relevant to that situation, necessary to that situation, we often see that as obfuscation or just getting in the way of the truth. To us, it's just clear what the answer is. And this is good and bad, right? This is very good for us in the sense that it makes life clear for us, but it can make it very difficult for us in social situations or in situations where there might be complexity that we're missing. And I think that often happens in a working environment. So in this situation, the black and white thinking was, I have already done this. I know it's possible to unload and I am right. And my manager was wrong and I don't want to keep doing this. That's it, right? I don't want to waste my time. I don't want a crappy lunch. I want to get off and I want to go to Walmart or wherever, and I'm right. That's the gist. I'm right. She's wrong. That's the hard center of this black and white thinking. And there was really no convincing me. From my personal experience, I knew it was possible to do this. And so it was very hard to change my mind. Now, it's relevant to note, on my next ship, our stores would often get lost on the port. So a huge part for our manager was going and finding the actual stores, which took ages because ports are huge. So in point of fact, my previous experience was not particularly relevant in every single situation. So the point is that it's very possible that I could have been wrong. But I was sure with the limited one contract I'd previously had, I was sure that I was right. Number 2, what could be considered disrespect for hierarchy? Yeah. I don't recognize hierarchy. I recognize that you're being paid more than me. I recognize that the king is the king. I don't think he should be. I don't think that just because you're being paid more than me, you're a better person or you should be more powerful or you have more right to my respect than someone else. If you are in that position and you're stupid or you're disrespectful, then I have even less respect for you. If you show me that you are worthy and you're good at that role, then absolutely I will respect you. But I'm respecting you because of your skills, your knowledge, your experience. I'm not respecting you because you're my manager or because you're the boss. And this different perspective on hierarchy is really, really common in autistic folks. We can see the hierarchy. It's not that we can't see it. We can see everybody's playing at hierarchy, but that's the point. To us, you're playing at it. To us, there is no difference between everybody. So why are you pretending that that person is better than you when they're clearly not? Or they're clearly just the same, or sometimes they're clearly worse. So for us, hierarchy is a real sticking point, and especially in a working environment, this is a really big problem for a lot of autistic people. So it was very hard for me to totally respect and believe in my boss because she didn't even want to discuss this with me. And that to me wasn't a strong, confident position. That was just rudeness. So I couldn't respect her as a manager. And that definitely affected the way that I dealt with the situation. Number 3, impulsivity. This is the worst of my ADHD traits. And my impulsivity has been the most destructive of my traits. I never stopped to think if this was a good idea. That first day when I sat down and said, I'm not going to lunch, I didn't stop to think about what the long-term impact of that was, whether this was a good idea, if I could get fired for it, if I would upset anybody else. It was a decision that I made. Number 4, we usually think of hyperfocus as being good at studying, like in the moment hyperfocus, but I think hyperfocus can also show up in our inability to move on, our inability to process something and change direction or move into thinking about something else. And for me, this was real hyperfocus. It took up a huge amount of my bandwidth. Every single time it got close to the end of a cruise, I would start thinking about this, and it would take up so much of my brain. And I probably talked about it all the time. I have a tendency to vent when I get frustrated. The fact that I was sure that I was right and I couldn't get my own way caused me to hyperfocus on this one thing and made it impossible for me to be able to just accept what she told me. Number 6, social understanding. It never crossed my mind that I would be damaging any social connections or being unreasonable or rude or making anyone uncomfortable. Nothing. I had zero social awareness with this. Even though I adore my best friend, I never once thought about how this might impact her and her experience on the ship and her experience with my manager. She'd been working there for a while, so she'd been with that manager for a while, and I never once thought about her relationship with our manager or anyone else's. It was pretty much entirely selfish, frankly. That lack of social understanding, that lack of feeling of peer pressure, oh, you shouldn't do that, or that's a bit rude, and that affecting you, it can be both a strength and a weakness. So many of our traits can be both a strength and a weakness. And this is definitely one of those. It was really easy, and still is really easy, to look at that situation and say, I was right. We could do it. I did the right thing, which is the success story that I had in my head for years. But what else was going on that I hadn't considered? And I think that's one of the really tricky, difficult, hard to deal with parts of a late autism diagnosis or self-diagnosis, is this piece about how has this impacted your life in ways that you don't know about because you didn't know that that was a thing that you were dealing with. And I think one of the big things for me is my impact on other people. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. And I have to say, for my brain, it's really hard to see the good. I tend to be very, very good at identifying bad things and not very good at identifying good things. So definitely that is a challenge for me. And so I will focus more on the negative things. And also, I haven't spoken to anybody else about this, so I don't know how much I impacted them. But my lovely roommate put all her social chips on the table for me without question and used her social currency, whether she was doing it on purpose or not, to help me succeed in my goal. And I have no doubt that without her accompanying me, it would have been an epic failure, because I needed bodies to make that happen fast. One person couldn't do that by themselves. It needed to be a team. And I wasn't really working very hard on enlisting the rest of the team. I was telling them what I wanted. I was telling them what was possible. But I wasn't saying, let's do it together. I wasn't like building strong team relationships or anything. I just had the single-mindedness to do it. And they followed along, which was very kind of them. If anybody's watching, which there probably never will be, but thank you very much if you did. I was delighted that you joined me. So how would it feel for my roommate to back me up no matter what? She's a very sweet person. I feel like that was probably not very easy for her to do. And what about the other employees? They might have agreed with me that they wanted to get off and that this could be done in a day, but they probably didn't agree with my methods. And there's also the possibility that they never really cared, that this just wasn't important to them. It was really important to me, so I assumed it was important to everybody else. Also, my boss. There's no getting around the fact that I completely undermined my boss over repeated public discussions, arguments, and then outright refusal to follow her lead and actively encouraging others to go against her. I know she didn't like me, but in hindsight, is it really surprising? Often our experiences are so real and so visceral, and many of us really love the jobs that we get, or we get more emotionally involved with our jobs than the average person. So it can lead to us losing sight of the experiences of others and the impact that our traits and choices might have on them. I'm not saying that we have to change who we are, although I know that I am not alone in working very, very hard to change who I am over the years. I'm not saying that that's the right thing to do, but I do think we need to consider the impact that we have, to consider how our traits not only affect us, but affect others too. And I think there are ways that we can manage these situations better, that are nicer for everybody. I'm not saying that everything's perfect for us and we're having a lovely time while all this is happening, because we all know that's not the case at all. All I'm saying is sometimes it's really hard for us to realize that our autism isn't just impacting us, it's impacting everybody around us. While I really still love this story, and I'm still pretty sure that I was right at the time, I also admit that this was probably not the right way to go about it, and that I could have perhaps achieved the same goal if I had gone about it in a totally different and less inflammatory way. And realistically, the whole thing probably wasn't quite as important to everybody as I felt that it was to me at the time. But I still think I'm right. And it's important to remember too that there is power in all of our traits. The same trait can be both a strength and a weakness at the same time. So, for example, my vision was so clear because my traits were informed by my experience. I had so much experience that made me entirely confident, and in fact overconfident, that this could be achieved on this boat, from this port, with this team. So that clear vision came from my experiences. And I think it's important, again, we're talking good and bad, right? So it's great that we can have that clear vision. That's really, really good. But we also need to look at things and say, actually, does my experience encompass all of the information about this situation? And in my case, it didn't. I know now from the next boat that I was on that sometimes it is impossible. So my experience was insufficient experience to know as much as I was certain that I knew. But the clarity of my vision enabled me to inspire other people to follow me. So our vision and our clear direction that we follow can be filled with such confidence that it can be inspiring to other people. So that is a benefit. I could provide a vision and I had solutions. And that's the other thing. With autistic people, are solution-based a lot of the time. We like solving problems. In fact, it's very hard for us to cope with situations where it's not a problem that we can solve. We very often can identify exactly what the problem is, and we can come with solutions for that problem. Autism is a spectrum, and I really feel like there are some parts that we are on opposite ends. There are some people I've met that are extremely easily persuaded, and there are some people that I've met are very not easily persuaded. That lack of impact on peer pressure means that we're not influenced by how our peers feel. So in that situation, I wasn't influenced by the fact that my peers probably felt very uncomfortable about this whole situation, would rather I would shut up and go away. No, I wasn't influenced at all. I was just carrying on along my way. So that can also be a useful thing in the workplace. We're able to identify and remove ineffective or out-of-date systems. And that's true throughout my career, not just this blip. that we're talking about. So there's a lot of benefits to this that can be very useful in the workplace. And of course, we have to recognize that all of those things can also be problematic in the workplace. And I think a lot of managers would find them very difficult to deal with. Could my manager have managed the situation any differently? For her, as a person, probably not. She was at the end of a contract. She was tired. She was ready to go home. And then she had this really annoying person just making it the worst contract ever. She was done and fed up, and I can totally get that. And also, in terms of managing people, she managed in cliques, and other managers that I had managed looking at each individual's abilities and building teams, and she built cliques. So that's not a method that's going to work for me at all. I don't fit into cliques, never have. So I'm always going to be on the outside of a clique, and that's always going to make me even less susceptible to peer pressure. I don't fit in, so I've got nothing to lose. So for that particular person, it's very possible that she wouldn't have been able to manage that situation differently. But I think that had a manager explained to me some reasoning that made sense to me. For example, on my ship that followed that, when I had a similar sort of situation, my manager actually took me off the boat with him to go get the stores. So he actually identified that I needed extra information, and he took me with him so I could see how big the port was, how little anybody cared that the shop people got off the boat. Like we were way down on the list of priorities for people, and how hard it was to find the stores, that actually logistically it wasn't very easy for us to get off the boat. So he was able to give me sufficient information to change my mind because I understood the circumstances better. She never even tried to explain to me. She just said, no, this is the way we do it. That's just not enough information for me. So I think if you're working with autistic people, it's a good idea to consider what kind of explanations you can give them. We have more questions. They're usually pretty good questions, even if they make you uncomfortable. And we need clear answers to those questions. We're not being difficult. Once we have those answers, we will be able to move on. But unless we have those answers, we can very easily get stuck on what you consider silly things as a manager. But for us, they can be extremely important. So I think it is possible to manage that situation differently, but it would require a different management method. So I can understand why people find this difficult, but I still think we're definitely worthwhile and necessary part of the workplace and the world. And I think a lot of our traits can be very, very useful and effective, especially in this modern world. I hope that has been useful for you and somewhat fun. It's kind of a long video. It's longer than I was anticipating. In the comments, I would like to hear from you. I would like to hear your workplace experiences. I'd love to hear if anybody else has committed mutiny on a boat or otherwise, and how did that go? I would also like to know, do you think that this situation was a hostile mutiny or was it appropriate action? And what would you have done in this situation? Let me know in the comments. And if you found this video useful, please consider subscribing to this extremely new channel. And I hope I will have more stuff for you next time. See you later. Bye.